The first thing you need to know about my brother's wedding is that it should have been called off 3 times before anyone even got to the altar. The second thing is that nobody did call it off, despite the universe practically screaming at us through storm clouds and cancelled vendors and the bride's mother's third nervous breakdown of the weekend. The third thing, and this is where it gets complicated, is that I met him there, the best man. And somehow, in the middle of all that beautiful disaster, something quiet started between us that I'm still trying to understand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started on Friday afternoon when I pulled into the gravel lot of Willowbrook Farm, an hour outside the city and approximately 15 years past its prime. The venue looked like someone had taken a Pinterest board titled Rustic Chic Wedding and fed it through a blender with budget constraints and false advertising. The barn was charming enough if you could ignore the fresh coat of paint that didn't quite cover the water stains and the reception tent that sagged like it was having second thoughts. I sat in my car for a moment, watching my brother Danny pace back and forth in front of the main building, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly at the sky. The weather app on my phone cheerfully informed me that we had a 60% chance of rain turning to storms by evening. Perfect. "Ethan!" Danny spotted me the moment I stepped out of the car. "Thank God you're here. The band just canceled. Something about their drummer's appendix and their backup van breaking down in Ohio. Or maybe it was the other way around. I don't know. Sarah's inside crying and her mother keeps suggesting we postpone and I just..." He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "Tell me this is going to be okay." I looked at my older brother, successful lawyer, homeowner, the one who always had his shit together, and saw a man on the edge of a complete breakdown. "It's going to be okay," I lied smoothly. "We'll figure something out." "You don't understand. We have 120 people coming tomorrow. The caterer is threatening to charge us extra because the kitchen facilities aren't what they were promised. Sarah's dress came in the wrong shade of ivory. Apparently, there's a difference between pearl and cream, and it matters. And now no music." "Danny," I put a hand on his shoulder. "Breathe. Where's your best man? Isn't he supposed to be handling this kind of crisis?" "Marcus?" "He's inside somewhere, probably solving 3 problems at once." Danny's face relaxed slightly. "Actually, yeah, he's been a lifesaver. I don't know what I'd do without him." Marcus. I'd heard the name a dozen times over the past few months, but had never met him. College roommate, now some kind of consultant who traveled constantly for work. Danny always spoke about him with the kind of easy affection that made me slightly envious. I'd never had that kind of steady friendship with anyone. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk and followed Danny toward the building, gravel crunching under our feet. The air smelled like rain and freshly cut grass, with an undertone of something less pleasant that I chose not to investigate. "There he is." Danny pointed toward a tall figure emerging from what I assumed was the venue coordinator's office. "Marcus." He looked up at the sound of his name, and I got my first clear look at him. Tall, like Danny had mentioned, probably 6'2" or 6'3", dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples, which made him look distinguished rather than old. He was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he moved with the kind of easy confidence that suggested he was comfortable pretty much anywhere. "The DJ situation is handled," he said as he approached us. "I found a guy who does weddings as a side gig. He's not as polished as a full band, but he's got all the classics and he can read a room. He'll be here by 6 tomorrow. Marcus, you're a miracle worker, Danny said. This is my brother Ethan, by the way. Ethan Marcus Chen. Marcus extended his hand and I shook it, noting the firm grip, the calluses that suggested he didn't just push papers around all day. Nice to finally meet you, he said. Danny talks about you constantly. All good things, I hope, I said, and immediately winced at how generic that sounded. Mostly. Marcus's mouth quirked up at one corner, not quite a smile, but close. He mentioned you're the artistic one in the family, photographer, I clarified, though Danny makes it sound more impressive than it is. He mentioned you did that series on urban decay that got picked up by some galleries. I was surprised he knew about that. It wasn't exactly mainstream work, black and white shots of abandoned buildings, empty lots, the spaces where the city showed its bones. Yeah, that was a thing that happened. I'd like to see it sometime. There was something in the way he said it, direct but not pushy, that made me look at him more carefully. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and when they met mine, I felt something shift slightly in my chest. Not attraction, exactly, or not just attraction. Recognition, maybe, like seeing someone across a crowded room and thinking, oh, there you are. The moment stretched just a beat too long, and then Marcus was looking away, back to Danny. We should probably get you inside. Sarah was looking for you, and I think the caterer has some questions about tomorrow's timeline. Danny groaned. More problems? Nothing that can't be solved, Marcus said calmly. That's what rehearsal dinners are for, working out the kinks. As we walked toward the building, I found myself watching Marcus from the corner of my eye. He moved like someone who was used to being the person others turned to in a crisis. Steady, unflappable. But there was something else there too, a kind of watchfulness that made me think he was more observer than participant, even when he was in the middle of solving everyone's problems. Maybe that's why I noticed him. We were both watchers, both more comfortable on the edges of things. The rehearsal dinner was held in the barn's main room, long tables set up with mismatched chairs and centerpieces that looked suspiciously like something Sarah had assembled herself from Pinterest tutorials. The lights were strung overhead in a way that was probably meant to look romantic, but mostly just made the water stains on the ceiling more visible. I ended up seated next to Marcus, which I suspected wasn't entirely accidental. Danny had a way of orchestrating these things without making it obvious. Sarah was at the head table looking beautiful and slightly manic, her mother hovering nearby with the expression of someone who was 3 glasses of wine deep and considering whether to make a scene. So, Marcus said as we waited for the salad course, what's your read on tonight's entertainment value? I glanced around the room, taking in the various family dynamics playing out at different tables. Sarah's uncle is definitely going to say something inappropriate during his speech. Her mother's going to cry, but not in a good way, and I'm pretty sure Danny's college friends are already too drunk. Observant. Marcus took a sip of his wine. You always like watching from the edges? The question caught me off guard, partly because of how casually he'd asked it, and partly because it was so accurate. Someone has to, I said. Otherwise, who's going to remember what actually happened? Fair point. He was quiet for a moment, watching as Danny stood up to tap his glass for attention. Though sometimes watching from the edges means you miss out on being part of the story. I was still processing that comment when Danny started his speech, thanking everyone for coming, talking about how much it meant to have family and friends there to celebrate. Standard stuff, heartfelt but safe. Sarah's uncle went next and, as predicted, managed to work in a joke about marriage being like a prison sentence that made half the room wince. Sarah's smile grew increasingly strained. Christ, I murmured under my breath, someone should have vetted these speeches. Marcus heard me and chuckled quietly. At least he didn't go with the ball and chain routine. Give him time, he's not done yet. Sure enough, Uncle Rick pivoted to a story about Sarah as a child that was somehow both boring and vaguely embarrassing. I felt genuinely sorry for her. You know, Marcus said quietly, leaning slightly closer so only I could hear. I've been to a lot of weddings and I'm starting to think the best ones are the disasters. How do you figure? The perfect weddings are forgettable, but the ones where everything goes wrong, those are the stories people tell for years. Remember Danny's wedding when the band canceled and it rained and Sarah's uncle gave that speech? I considered this. So, you're saying disaster builds character? I'm saying disaster builds memories, and memories are what matter, not whether the flowers match the napkins. It was such a Marcus thing to say, practical but oddly profound. I was beginning to understand why Danny valued his friendship so much. The speech mercifully ended, and we moved on to the main course. The food was actually better than expected, which felt like the first genuinely positive development of the weekend. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing slightly, helped along by the wine and by Marcus's steady presence beside me. He was easy to talk to, I discovered. He asked good questions and actually listened to the answers, which was rarer than it should be. When I mentioned that I was between projects trying to figure out what to shoot next, he didn't offer generic advice or tell me about his cousin who was also into photography. He just nodded and said, "That in between space is tough, but it usually means you're getting ready for something bigger. You sound like you speak from experience. I spent 2 years after college basically drifting. Everyone else seemed to know exactly what they wanted to do, and I was just figuring it out. Drove my parents crazy." What changed? He shrugged. I stopped waiting for some grand revelation and started paying attention to what I was actually good at. Turns out I'm decent at solving other people's problems. Hence the consulting. Hence the consulting. He smiled, and I realized it was the first real smile I'd seen from him all evening. It transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. "What about you? What made you pick up a camera?" It was a question I'd been asked 100 times, but somehow, when Marcus asked it, I found myself giving a different answer than usual. I wanted to show people things they weren't seeing. The city I grew up in, everyone just saw the surface, the nice neighborhoods, the tourist spots, but there were all these other layers underneath, places that were forgotten or abandoned or just overlooked. I wanted to make those visible. Marcus nodded slowly. The spaces between things. Yeah, exactly. That's what I like about your work. Most photographers try to show you what to look at. You show people how to look. It was such a simple way to put it, but it captured something about my photography that I'd never been able to articulate myself. I felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. The evening was winding down when Sarah's mother finally made her scene. It started with a conversation about the weather forecast that escalated into tears and accusations about poor planning and why couldn't they have just had the wedding at the country club like she'd suggested. Sarah ended up leaving the table in tears, and Danny followed her, leaving the rest of us to sit in awkward silence. Well, Marcus said mildly, that was inevitable. You called it, I agreed. Family weddings bring out the best in everyone. He finished his wine and stood up. I should probably go check on Danny, see if there's any damage control needed. I watched him go, noting how he moved through the room, not rushing, not drawing attention to himself, just quietly efficient. Several people stopped him to ask questions or make comments, and he handled each interaction with the same calm competence. I was collecting my jacket when he reappeared at my elbow. Crisis averted? I asked. For now, Sarah's calmed down, Danny's breathing again, and her mother has been relegated to helping with cleanup, which will hopefully keep her occupied. He paused. You heading back to your room? Eventually, thought I might get some air first. It's been a long day. Mind if I join you? I could use a few minutes away from the drama. Sure. We walked outside together, and I was struck by how different the night felt from the afternoon. The air was cooler now, with that electric feeling that comes before a storm. The lights from the barn cast long shadows across the gravel lot, and somewhere in the distance I could hear music from what was probably another wedding reception. I pulled out my phone to check the weather. Looks like the rain's going to hold off until tomorrow afternoon. Danny might actually get his outdoor ceremony. Good. He's been stressed enough about everything else. Marcus leaned against the fence rail that separated the parking area from a field beyond. You know, for all the chaos, I think it's going to be a good wedding. What makes you say that? Because underneath all the stress and family drama, Danny and Sarah actually love each other. That's rarer than you'd think. I joined him at the fence, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something subtle and woody. You've been to a lot of weddings where that wasn't the case. A few, you can usually tell. The couples who are more in love with the idea of a wedding than with each other. They're the ones who fall apart when things don't go according to plan. He glanced at me. Danny and Sarah are going to be fine. They're the kind of people who'll laugh about this weekend in 5 years. And in 10 years? In 10 years they'll still be laughing about it, but they'll also be grateful for it because it taught them early that they can handle anything together. There was something wistful in his voice that made me curious. Sounds like you've given this some thought. Occupational hazard. I spent a lot of time thinking about what makes relationships work. He was quiet for a moment. What about you? Ever come close to the whole marriage thing? It was a casual question, but I felt the weight of it. Once, college girlfriend, we talked about it, but I shrugged. We wanted different things, I guess. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth was more complicated, involving a slow realization that what I wanted wasn't something I could have with Jessica or with any woman. But that wasn't a conversation for a wedding weekend with someone I'd just met. Sometimes that's for the best, Marcus said diplomatically. What about you? Came close once too, about 5 years ago, but work got in the way and we couldn't figure out how to make the logistics work. He smiled ruefully. Story of my life, actually. I'm good at solving other people's problems, not so great at solving my own. There was something in his tone that suggested there was more to that story, but I didn't push. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the clouds move across the moon. In the distance, thunder rumbled softly. "We should probably head in," Marcus said eventually. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Yeah," but neither of us moved. "Thanks," he said after a moment. "For what?" "For the company. It's nice to have someone else who gets it, the observer thing. Most people want to be in the middle of everything. Most people don't see as much that way. No, they don't." He pushed off from the fence. "See you tomorrow, Ethan." "See you tomorrow." I watched him walk back toward the building, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed despite the day's stress. Only when he disappeared inside did I realize was still standing at the fence, replaying our conversation and trying to figure out why it had felt different from the dozens of similar exchanges I'd had with other people at other weddings. Maybe it was just that he'd seen me clearly, the watching, the staying on the edges, and hadn't tried to change it or fix it. He'd just acknowledged it like it was something worth understanding rather than something to be overcome. Or maybe it was the way he'd looked at me when he asked if I'd ever come close to marriage, like he was asking a different question entirely. I pulled out my phone to check the time and saw a text from Danny. "Thanks for being here. I know weddings aren't your thing, but it means a lot." I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. Get some sleep." Then I added, "Your best man is good people, by the way." The response came back almost immediately. "I knew you two would get along." There was something about that text that made me pause. I knew you two would get along. Like Danny had been hoping we would. Like maybe our seating arrangement at dinner hadn't been as accidental as I'd thought. But that was probably just Danny being Danny. Always the matchmaker, always trying to bring together the people he cared about. It didn't mean anything beyond that, did it? Saturday morning dawned gray and humid with the kind of heavy sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten to. I woke up in my generic hotel room to a text from Danny. "Emergency breakfast meeting, main dining room, 8 a.m. Bring coffee." I showed up to find Danny, Sarah, Marcus, and what appeared to be half the wedding party crowded around two push-together tables, looking like survivors of some kind of natural disaster. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed. Danny looked like he hadn't slept, and even Marcus seemed a little frayed around the edges. "Okay," Sarah was saying as I approached. "So the florist says she can get us replacement arrangements, but they won't be exactly what we ordered and they'll cost extra. The photographer, not you, Ethan, the official one, is running late because of traffic. And the cake?" She stopped, pressing her hands to her temples. "The cake is fine, right? Please tell me the cake is fine." "The cake is fine," Marcus said calmly. "I checked with the baker this morning. Everything's on schedule." "Thank God for small favors," Danny muttered. I slid into an empty chair next to Marcus and signaled the waitress for coffee. "What else?" "The weather," Sarah said miserably. "It's supposed to start raining around 2, right in the middle of the ceremony. We could move everything inside, but the barn isn't really set up for that, and with 120 people, it's going to be tight," Marcus agreed. "But doable if we need to. Or," Danny said, "we could take our chances with the weather. Have the ceremony outside as planned and hope for the best." "That's a terrible idea," Sarah's mother said from across the table. She'd been quiet until now, but apparently couldn't hold back any longer. "What if it's pouring? What if everyone gets soaked? What if the dress gets ruined?" "Mom," Sarah said wearily, "we've been over this." "I'm just saying there are practical considerations which we're handling," Marcus interrupted smoothly. We've got a backup plan for every scenario. Whatever happens, it's going to be a beautiful wedding. Something about his tone, calm, confident, utterly unruffled, seemed to settle everyone slightly. Even Sarah's mother subsided into grumbling rather than outright panic. "What's the backup plan?" I asked. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a detailed note that looked like it had been revised multiple times. Plan A, ceremony outside as scheduled, reception in the tent. Plan B, ceremony in the barn, reception in the tent. Plan C, everything inside tight but workable. Plan D, everyone gets a little wet and we call it rustic charm. "You've really thought this through. That's what I do." He met my eyes across the table. "Besides, like I said last night, the disasters make the best stories." "Easy for you to say," Danny muttered. "It's not your wedding." "No, but it's my best friend's wedding," Marcus said quietly, "which means it matters to me too." There was something in the way he said it that made me look at him more carefully. Not just professional competence, but genuine care. He wasn't just managing a crisis, he was protecting something that mattered to him. The breakfast meeting continued for another hour, with various family members offering suggestions and opinions that ranged from helpful to completely insane. Through it all, Marcus remained the steady center of the conversation, fielding questions, offering solutions, gently redirecting when things got too heated. I found myself watching him more than participating, noting the way he handled different personalities, firm with Sarah's mother, encouraging with Sarah, practical with Danny. He had a gift for reading people, for knowing exactly what each person needed to hear. When the meeting finally broke up, I lingered at the table while everyone else scattered to handle their various responsibilities. Marcus was making notes on his phone, updating his backup plans based on the morning's developments. "You're good at this," I said. He looked up. "Good at what?" "Managing chaos, keeping everyone calm." "It's just logistics," he said, but I could tell he was pleased by the compliment. "Though I have to admit, this is more complicated than most of my consulting projects." "What kind of consulting do you do exactly?" "Organizational efficiency mostly. I come in when companies are struggling with workflow problems, communication breakdowns, that kind of thing. Figure out what's not working and help them fix it. So basically, what you're doing here, but with corporations instead of weddings." "Exactly," he smiled, "though weddings are more emotionally fraught than most corporate restructures." That's saying something. You'd be surprised. I once had a CFO throw a stapler at me during a budget meeting. "Did you duck?" "Didn't need to. He had terrible aim." Marcus finished his notes and put his phone away. "What about you? Any plans for today besides moral support?" "I thought I might take some photos, not official ones, just documentation, if that's okay with everyone." "I think Danny would love that. Sarah too, probably." They're so focused on all the things that might go wrong, they might forget to notice the things that go right. That's the idea." I hesitated, then added, "Would you mind if I got some shots of you too? You're part of the story." Something shifted in his expression, not uncomfortable exactly, but more aware. I'm usually the one behind the camera at these things, not in front of it. That's exactly why. Someone should document the person who's holding everything together. He looked at me for a long moment, and I had the sudden feeling that he was seeing something in me that I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to reveal. "Okay," he said finally, "but nothing that makes me look heroic. I'm just doing my job. I'll try to keep it subtle. Somehow I don't think subtle is a problem for you." There was something in his tone that made me think he was talking about more than just photography, but before I could figure out how to respond, Sarah appeared at the table looking slightly manic. Marcus, thank God. The venue coordinator has questions about the sound system, and I can't find Danny anywhere. And I think my dress might be too long, but I'm not sure. And Sarah, Marcus stood up, hands on her shoulders. Breathe. What's the most urgent thing? The sound system. Okay, let's go handle that first, and then we'll find Danny and figure out the dress situation. I watched them walk away together, Sarah's panic visibly decreasing just from having Marcus's attention and focus. It occurred to me that this was probably what he was like in his professional life too, the person everyone turned to when things got complicated, the steady presence in the middle of other people's chaos. It was an attractive quality, I realized, not just the competence, but the care behind it. The way he made people feel heard and supported even when he was solving their problems. I spent the rest of the morning wandering around the venue with my camera, capturing the small moments that would probably be forgotten in the rush of the official ceremony. The bridesmaids helping each other with their hair, Danny's college friends setting up chairs in the rain, Sarah's grandmother giving advice to anyone who would listen, and Marcus, always in the background handling one small crisis after another with the same calm efficiency. I got a good shot of him kneeling beside a broken tent stake, hammer in hand, completely focused on the task, despite wearing what was probably an expensive shirt. Another of him listening intently to the florist's explanation of why the replacement arrangements were different from what was ordered, his expression serious but not alarmed. He was right about not looking heroic, but there was something compelling about the images anyway, the quiet competence, the attention to detail, the way he moved through the chaos as if he belonged there. Around noon the rain started. Not a dramatic downpour everyone had been fearing, but a steady drizzle that made everything look gray and soggy. I found Marcus in the barn, conferring with the venue coordinator about moving the ceremony inside. How bad is it? I asked. Could be worse, he said, but his expression was tense. The tent can handle light rain, but if it gets heavier, we're going to have problems. And the ground outside is already getting muddy. Plan B? Looking more likely by the minute, he ran a hand through his hair. Sarah's going to be devastated. Maybe not. The barn has character. The barn has water stains and a sound system that cuts out randomly. So we'll work around it. You said it yourself. Disasters make the best stories. He looked at me sharply. You're using my own words against me. Is it working? A little. He almost smiled. Come on, let's go break the news to the happy couple. We found Danny and Sarah in the bridal suite, which was really just a converted office with better lighting. Sarah was in her dress, which was indeed beautiful despite the wrong shade of ivory, and Danny was in his tux, looking nervous but determined. How bad is it out there? Sarah asked immediately. We're moving to Plan B, Marcus said gently. Ceremony in the barn, reception in the tent. It's going to be beautiful. Sarah's face crumpled. I wanted the outdoor ceremony, the photos under the trees, the natural light. We'll still get beautiful photos, I said quickly. The barn has great natural light from those big windows, and the rustic setting is going to be gorgeous. Trust me on this. You think so? I know so. Some of my favorite shots come from unexpected settings. Sarah looked between Marcus and me, then at Danny, who nodded encouragingly. Okay, she said finally. Plan B it is. Good, Marcus said. I'll go coordinate with the coordinator about moving the chairs and sound system. Ethan, can you help me with that? Of course. We spent the next hour moving chairs and rearranging the barn while the rain continued outside. It was physical work, the kind that required communication but not much conversation, and I found myself paying attention to the way Marcus moved, the way he anticipated problems and solutions. You know, I said as we lined up the last row of chairs, this might actually be better than the outdoor setup, more intimate. Marcus straightened, surveying our work. You really think so? Yeah, look at it. The light from the windows, the exposed beams, the way the chairs are arranged. It feels like a real ceremony, not a photo shoot. Careful, Marcus said. You're starting to sound like you actually enjoy weddings. Maybe I'm starting to enjoy this wedding, something in my tone that made him look at me more carefully. Yeah? Yeah, I met his eyes. Good company helps. We looked at each other for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and I felt that same shift in my chest that I'd noticed when we first met. Recognition, attraction, possibility, all mixed up together in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. Then the coordinator appeared with a question about the microphone placement, and the moment passed. But something had been acknowledged between us, something that made the rest of the afternoon feel different. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Sarah's fears proved unfounded. The barn setting was intimate and romantic, and the rain outside only made it feel more cozy. Danny cried when he saw Sarah walking down the aisle. Sarah cried during the vows, and even Sarah's mother seemed to approve of the way things turned out. I got some good shots during the ceremony, but I found myself watching Marcus as much as I was working. He stood at Danny's side with quiet dignity, holding the rings, offering silent support. When Danny stumbled slightly over his vows, Marcus was there with a steadying hand on his shoulder. When Sarah's flower girl started crying halfway down the aisle, Marcus discreetly signaled to one of the bridesmaids to help. He was good at this, I realized, not just the logistics and problem solving, but the emotional support, the being present for the people he cared about. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, I found myself gravitating toward him again. He was standing near the bar, talking to Danny's parents, but when he saw me approaching, he excused himself. How are the photos coming? He asked. Good. Really good, actually. The barn was the right choice. Sarah seems happy with it. She should be. It was perfect. I paused. You did good today. Just doing my job, he said, but I could tell he was pleased. This isn't your job, this is friendship. Maybe that's the same thing sometimes. There was something wistful in his voice again, that same note I'd heard the night before. I wanted to ask about it, but before I could figure out how, Danny appeared at our sides. There you two are, he said, slightly breathless. Sarah wants to get some photos with the wedding party before we start dinner. Marcus, you're in these, obviously. Ethan, can you coordinate with the official photographer? Sure thing. The photo session took longer than expected, partly because of the logistics of getting everyone organized and partly because Sarah's photographer turned out to be one of those people who took 40 shots of everything and still wasn't satisfied. By the time we were done, the cocktail hour was winding down and people were starting to migrate toward the reception tent. Thank God that's over, Marcus murmured as we walked toward the tent together. I thought she was going to make us hold those poses until next Tuesday. At least you looked comfortable. I always look like I'm being held hostage in group photos. It's the smile. You're trying too hard. The trick is to think about something that actually makes you happy instead of just arranging your face. What were you thinking about? That this whole weekend could have been a complete disaster, but somehow it's turning out okay. That's what makes you happy, crisis averted? Sometimes. He glanced at me. What about you? What would you think about if you wanted to look genuinely happy in a photo? It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. What did make me genuinely happy? Not the big things, the career achievements or major life events, the small things, the quiet moments, good light on our ordinary building, a conversation that went deeper than expected, the feeling of understanding someone and being understood in return. This I said without thinking. Today, right now. Marcus stopped walking. Yeah, yeah. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Sorry, that was... No, don't apologize. His voice was quiet. I know what you mean. We looked at each other for a moment that felt suspended in time, full of possibilities and questions I wasn't sure either of us was ready to ask. Then someone called Marcus's name from inside the tent, and the moment passed. But something had shifted again, something deeper this time. And as we walked into the reception together, I found myself wondering what it would feel like to stop watching from the edges and step into the center of whatever was happening between us. The reception was where everything started to fall apart. Not immediately, of course. For the first hour or so, everything went according to plan. The food was good, the DJ Marcus had found was actually excellent, and the tent held up admirably against the steadily increasing rain outside. Sarah looked radiant, Danny looked relieved, and even Sarah's mother seemed to be enjoying herself. I was standing near the back of the tent, camera in hand, documenting the small moments, elderly relatives dancing carefully to oldies, children running between tables, the quiet conversations happening in corners. Marcus was somewhere in the middle of it all, still troubleshooting minor issues but looking more relaxed than he had all weekend. That's when Sarah's Uncle Rick decided to make his second speech of the weekend. He'd been drinking steadily since the cocktail hour, and what had been merely inappropriate jokes the night before had evolved into something much more uncomfortable. He started with the standard "marriage is hard work" routine, then moved into increasingly personal territory about Sarah's previous relationships and Danny's bachelor party adventures. I watched Sarah's face go from polite smile to visible discomfort to something approaching horror as Rick recounted a story about Danny's college years that was both unflattering and probably not true. Danny looked like he wanted to crawl under the table, and several other family members were making "shut up" gestures that Rick was pointedly ignoring. Someone needs to stop this, I murmured to Marcus, who had appeared at my elbow. Working on it, he said grimly, and I watched him make his way toward the DJ booth. A moment later, the microphone mysteriously cut out in the middle of Rick's story about Danny's brief stint as a ladies' man. Rick tapped the microphone a few times, shrugged, and mercifully sat down to scattered applause. "Nice work," I said when Marcus returned. "The sound system is surprisingly responsive when you know which cable to unplug." But the damage was done. Sarah was fighting back tears, Danny looked mortified, and the general mood of the reception had shifted from celebratory to uncomfortable. People were talking in hushed voices, and I could see several groups of relatives having what looked like heated discussions. I should go check on Sarah, Marcus said, but before he could move, we heard raised voices from outside the tent. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see Danny's college friends gathered around someone who was gesticulating wildly. One of them, Mike, I think, was clearly drunk and getting louder by the minute. Jesus, Marcus muttered. What now? We pushed through the crowd toward the tent's entrance, arriving just in time to see Mike shove one of Sarah's cousins. Hard. The cousin stumbled backward, his drink flying, and suddenly everyone was yelling at once. That's enough! Danny's voice cut through the chaos as he appeared from nowhere, still in his wedding suit but with his tie askew. Mike, you're done. Get out of here. Come on, man, it was just a joke. No, it wasn't. You're drunk. You're being an ass, and this is my wedding. Leave. Now. Mike looked around the circle of faces, realized he had no support, and stalked off toward the parking lot, muttering under his breath. The cousin he'd shoved was checking his shirt for stains, and Sarah's relatives were clustering around him, offering napkins and sympathy. Everyone okay? Marcus asked, appearing at Danny's side with the easy authority of someone used to managing crises. Yeah, we're fine, Danny said, but he looked shaken. I'm sorry, everyone. Mike's been having a rough time lately, but that's no excuse. Don't apologize, Sarah's cousin said. Not your fault some people can't handle their liquor. But the incident had cast a pall over what was left of the reception. People started making excuses to leave. Early mornings, long drives, babysitters to relieve. Within an hour, the celebration that had started with 120 guests was down to maybe 30 people, mostly immediate family. I found myself helping with cleanup, stacking chairs, and collecting abandoned centerpieces, partly because it seemed like the right thing to do, and partly because I wasn't ready for the weekend to be over. Marcus was everywhere at once, coordinating with the caterers, settling accounts with vendors, making sure all the wedding gifts made it safely into Danny's car. You don't have to do this, he said when he found me breaking down table linens. You're a guest. So are you, technically. Fair point. He grabbed another stack of linens, though I think we both know I stopped being just a guest somewhere around the first crisis. When was that? Friday afternoon? Try Thursday night when Danny called me in a panic about the weather forecast. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the mundane tasks somehow soothing after the day's emotional roller coaster. The rain had finally stopped, and through the tent's open flaps I could see stars beginning to appear between the clouds. You know, I said as we folded the last tablecloth, for a disaster, this turned out pretty well. Sarah and Danny seemed happy by the end. More than happy, they looked solid, like they'd gotten through something together. Marcus nodded. That's the thing about weddings. All the planning and preparation, but what really matters is how you handle the unexpected stuff. Is that your professional opinion? That's my human opinion. He straightened up, surveying the cleaned-up tent. I think we're done here. Most of the remaining guests were gathered in the barn's main room, where someone had set up an impromptu after-party with the leftover alcohol and a playlist of music that was significantly better than what the DJ had been playing earlier. Sarah had changed out of her wedding dress into jeans and a sweater, and she looked more relaxed than I'd seen her all weekend. "There's my photographer," she said when she spotted me. "I can't wait to see what you captured today." "Some good moments," I said. "I'll get you a selection by the end of the week." "Did you get any shots of the chaos? I want to remember all of it, even the parts that went wrong." Especially the parts that went wrong, Danny added, appearing with beers for Marcus and me. Those are the stories we'll be telling for years. I caught Marcus's eye and saw him suppress a smile. Told you so, he murmured. The impromptu party continued until nearly midnight, with people drifting in and out of conversations, sharing stories about the day and about Danny and Sarah's relationship. I found myself watching Marcus again, noting how different he seemed now that the official responsibilities were over, more relaxed, more willing to just be present instead of constantly problem solving. When Sarah's grandmother started telling stories about her own wedding 60 years ago, complete with disasters that made this weekend look like a masterpiece of organization, Marcus ended up sitting next to me on one of the hay bales that had been arranged as makeshift seating. 60 years, he said quietly. That's something. You think they'll make it that long, Danny and Sarah? I think they've got a good chance. They've got the important stuff figured out, which is they like each other, really like each other, not just love, and they know how to laugh at themselves. I considered this. What about the rest of it? The compatibility stuff, the life goals, all that? Important, but not as much as people think. You can figure out the logistics if you actually enjoy each other's company. He took a sip of his beer. What about you? You ever want the whole marriage thing? It was the second time he'd asked me about marriage, and this time I was more prepared for it, sort of. I used to think I did, I said carefully. When I was younger, I had this whole picture in my head of what my life would look like. House in the suburbs, 2 cars, 2 kids, the whole package. What changed? I realized the picture wasn't really mine. It was what I thought I was supposed to want. I paused, wondering how much to reveal. Turns out figuring out what you actually want is harder than following someone else's script. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, I know what you mean. I spent most of my 20s trying to build the life I thought I was supposed to have. Took me a while to realize it wasn't making me happy. What does make you happy? Honest question. Honest question. Work that matters, good friends, quiet mornings with coffee and no agenda. He glanced at me. Conversations that go deeper than small talk. Like this one, like this one. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to Sarah's grandmother describe the disaster of her wedding cake collapsing in the heat. Around us, the party was winding down, people starting to make noises about early flights and long drives. I should probably start thinking about heading back, I said eventually. Early meeting tomorrow. Photography stuff, client consultation. Might turn into something interesting, might be another generic corporate headshots job. The glamorous life of a freelance photographer. Hey, those generic corporate headshots pay the rent. Marcus smiled. Fair enough. What time do you need to be back in the city? 10 or so. You? No specific time. I'm driving back tomorrow morning, probably after breakfast. Why? Just curious. But even as I said it, I was thinking about the logistics of the trip home, wondering if there was a reason to extend this conversation, this connection beyond tonight. The party finally broke up around 12:30 with tearful goodbyes and promises to get together soon that everyone knew probably wouldn't happen. Danny and Sarah looked exhausted but happy, and they thanked Marcus and me multiple times for all our help. Seriously, Sarah said, hugging me goodbye. You two were lifesavers today. I don't know what we would have done without you. That's what family's for, I said, meaning it more than I'd expected to. And friends, she added, looking at Marcus. The very best friends. As people dispersed to their cars and hotel rooms, I found myself walking back toward the main building with Marcus. Our footsteps crunched on the gravel, and the air smelled like rain and wet earth and the faint remnants of wedding flowers. Hell of a wedding, Marcus said, echoing his words from the night before. Hell of a weekend. You doing okay? He asked, and there was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. Yeah, I'm okay. Why? You seemed a little overwhelmed earlier during the reception when everything was falling apart. He was right, though I hadn't realized it was that obvious. It's not my favorite thing watching people I care about get hurt. Sarah looked so upset when her uncle was making those jokes, and then I had the fight outside. But they handled it, Marcus pointed out. Danny stepped up. Sarah recovered. The wedding continued. They're stronger than you think. I know, it's just I struggled to find the words. I'm used to being able to fix things. With photography, if something's not working, I can adjust the lighting or change the angle or wait for a better moment. But with people, with situations like today, all I can do is watch. Marcus stopped walking. You did more than watch. You helped with setup. You documented everything. You were there when people needed support. That matters. It doesn't feel like enough sometimes. It's enough, he said quietly. Trust me on that. We'd reached the main building where our paths would diverge. Him toward the hotel on the property, me toward the parking lot and my car. This was where we'd say goodbye, where the weekend would officially end, and we'd go back to being strangers who'd happened to meet at a wedding. Thank you, I said, for today, for this whole weekend. You made it better. You too, he said, and then, after a moment's hesitation, this might be presumptuous, but would you like to get coffee sometime when we're back in the city and not dealing with wedding chaos? The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't want to say yes, but because I'd been so sure this was ending here. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that a lot. Good, Marcus smiled, and it was that same real smile that had transformed his face at the rehearsal dinner. I'll text you. I'll answer. We stood there for another moment, neither of us quite ready to walk away, and I found myself thinking about all the conversations we hadn't had yet, all the things I wanted to know about him that had nothing to do with wedding logistics or crisis management. Get some sleep, Marcus said finally. Tomorrow's going to come early. You too. I watched him walk toward the hotel, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been all weekend. Only when he disappeared inside did I head toward my car, already looking forward to his text, already thinking about what coffee shop might be good for a first non-wedding conversation. As I drove back toward the city, windows down despite the late hour, I found myself smiling for no particular reason. The weekend had been a disaster in all the expected ways, but it had also been something else, something I hadn't anticipated and wasn't quite ready to name. But whatever it was, I was looking forward to finding out. Part 2. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of the uncomfortable hotel mattress or the lingering adrenaline from the wedding chaos, but because I kept replaying conversations with Marcus, analyzing the space between words. The moments when our eyes had met across crowded rooms. By 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and headed down to the hotel's sad excuse for a breakfast buffet. I wasn't expecting to see anyone I knew. Most of the wedding guests had been staying at different hotels, and the few who were here would probably sleep until checkout time. So, when I spotted Marcus at a corner table with coffee and what looked like the morning newspaper, I felt that same little jolt of recognition I'd been experiencing all weekend. Early riser? I asked, approaching his table with my own coffee and a pastry that had seen better days. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. Mind if I join you, or were you looking for some alone time? Please sit. I was just going to scroll through my phone and pretend to check emails. Marcus folded his newspaper and set it aside. Rough night? Something like that, you? Same. Too much caffeine, too much thinking. He studied my face. You look tired. Thanks, that's exactly what every guy wants to hear first thing in the morning. I meant you look like someone who's been processing a lot. It was an intense weekend. He was right, though I wasn't sure how much of my processing had been about the wedding itself versus everything else that had happened. It was a lot, I agreed. Good, but a lot. Danny texted me this morning. He and Sarah are already calling it the best worst wedding ever. That sounds about right. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our coffee and watching through the windows as the venue staff began the massive cleanup operation. In the bright morning light, Willowbrook Farm looked tired but not defeated, like it had seen plenty of weddings come and go and would see plenty more. What's your plan for getting back to the city? Marcos asked eventually. Probably leave after checkout, get home around noon. You? Similar timeline. I was thinking about grabbing some actual breakfast on the way. There's supposed to be a good diner about 20 minutes down the highway. It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't not an invitation either. That sounds better than whatever this is supposed to be, I said, gesturing at my pastry. Want to convoy? We could follow each other in case one of us runs into car trouble. Sure. That makes sense. It did make sense, but I knew that wasn't why either of us was suggesting it. We weren't ready for the weekend to be over. Weren't ready to go back to our separate lives without at least a little more time to figure out what was happening between us. Checkout was quick, and within an hour we were caravanning down a 2-lane highway toward a place called Mel's Diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1987. The parking lot was full of pickup trucks and motorcycles, which seemed like a good sign. Inside, Mel's was exactly what you'd expect. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, waitresses who called everyone hon and poured coffee without being asked. Marcus and I found a booth near the back, and I realized this was the first time we'd been completely alone together, away from wedding chaos and family obligations. So, I said after we'd ordered, pancakes for me, eggs Benedict for him, which somehow seemed exactly right for both of us. How long have you known Danny? Since freshman year of college. We were randomly assigned as roommates and somehow it worked. Marcus smiled at the memory. He was this intense pre-law student who had his whole life planned out, and I was a business major who had no idea what I actually wanted to do. We balanced each other out. You're still balancing each other out. Different ways now, but yeah, he keeps me grounded. I keep him from taking himself too seriously. Is that your role in most friendships? The one who solves problems and keeps things light? Marcus considered this. Probably more than I should. It's easier than dealing with my own stuff sometimes. What's your own stuff? Honest question again? Honest question. I'm really good at helping other people figure out their lives, but I'm terrible at figuring out my own. I've been single for 3 years. I live in an apartment that still feels temporary even though I've been there for 5 years. And I travel so much for work. that I don't really have a home base anywhere. That sounds lonely. Sometimes it is. He met my eyes across the table. But sometimes you meet someone who makes you think maybe you've been approaching the whole thing wrong. The waitress appeared with our food before I could respond to that, which was probably good because I wasn't sure what to say. The implication was clear enough, but Marcus had a way of saying meaningful things so casually that I wasn't sure if I was reading too much into them. "What about you?" he asked as we started eating. "You mentioned you were between projects. What's next?" That's the $1 million question. I've been doing a lot of commercial work lately, corporate stuff, some wedding photography, nothing too artistic. It pays the bills, but it's not exactly fulfilling. What would be fulfilling? I want to do another series like the Urban Decay Project, something that matters, that shows people things they haven't seen before. I paused, considering how much to reveal. I've been thinking about doing something on queer spaces in the city, the bars and clubs and community centers, but also the quieter places, the bookstores and coffee shops and parks where people go to just exist without having to perform or hide. Marcus's expression sharpened with interest. That sounds important. It feels important, but it's also scary putting that much of myself into the work. Because it's personal. Because it's personal, I agreed. We ate in thoughtful silence for a while, and I found myself studying Marcus's face in the diner's fluorescent lighting. He had good bones, strong jaw, eyes that seemed to notice everything. There was something calming about his presence, the way he listened without judgment, the way he made space for difficult conversations. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually. "Sure." "Yesterday, when you asked about marriage, about whether I'd ever come close, did you really want to know, or were you asking something else?" Marcus set down his fork and looked at me directly. "I was asking something else." "What were you asking?" "Whether you were available, whether there was room in your life for someone new." "And now you know?" "Now I know." He smiled slightly. "What about you? Any questions you've been wanting to ask?" "A few?" I took a breath. "Are you looking for something serious, or are you one of those guys who collects interesting people for casual conversation?" "Serious," he said without hesitation. "I'm too old for games, and I'm too tired of being lonely to waste time on casual anything." "Good, that's good. What else?" "Are you out?" "Like generally out, not just to close friends?" "Completely out. Have been since college. I'm not interested in closets or complications." "Also good." "Your turn to answer something," Marcus said. "What made you want to ask me about queer spaces? Was that just an example? Or is that actually what you want to work on next?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "It's actually what I want to work on next." Which means? "Which means I'm gay, and I've been thinking about how to use my work to document my community." "How long have you been out?" "Officially, about 2 years. Unofficially, I've been figuring it out for longer than that." Marcus nodded. "That explains some things." "Like what?" "Like why you seemed nervous when I asked about marriage. Like why you watch from the edges instead of jumping into the middle of things. Like why you seemed surprised that I was paying attention to you." "Was it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there." Marcus reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. "For what it's worth, I think the Queer Spaces project sounds incredible, and I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for." The touch was brief, barely more than a brush of fingers, but it sent electricity up my arm and made something settle in my chest that I hadn't realized was unsettled. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For making this easy, for not making me feel like I had to explain or justify anything. Everyone's timeline is different. There's no right or wrong way to figure yourself out. We finished breakfast with the conversation flowing more easily than it had all weekend. Marcus told me about his consulting work, the satisfaction of helping dysfunctional organizations find their rhythm. I told him about some of my favorite photography projects, the thrill of capturing moments that revealed something true about the world. When it came time to leave, we stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, neither of us quite ready to get back on the highway. "So," Marcus said, "coffee in the city sometime soon?" "Definitely, though I should warn you I'm probably going to be nervous and awkward for the first 20 minutes of any official date." "Good thing I like nervous and awkward." "You do?" "It means you're taking it seriously." We exchanged numbers properly this time, and Marcos programmed his contact information into my phone while I did the same with his. When he handed my phone back, our fingers brushed again, and this time neither of us pulled away immediately. "Drive safe," he said. "You too." I got halfway to my car before turning back. Marcus was still standing where I'd left him, keys in his hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus, yeah? Thanks for a hell of a weekend." His smile was worth the slight awkwardness of the moment. "Thanks for making it interesting." The drive back to the city passed in a blur of highways and radio music, my mind replaying the morning's conversation and trying to process everything that had shifted between us. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt cautiously optimistic about whatever was beginning. My phone buzzed as I was unlocking my door. A text from Marcus. "Made it home safely, thanks for breakfast." "Looking forward to that coffee." I texted back. "Me too, really looking forward to it." His response came almost immediately. "You free Thursday evening? There's a place in the village I've been wanting to try." "Thursday works. Send me the details." "Will do. Get some rest." I set my phone aside and looked around my apartment, small, cluttered with photography equipment and prints, definitely lived in rather than staged. It occurred to me that Marcus would probably be here at some point, that I'd want to show him my work, cook him dinner, wake up next to him on Sunday mornings. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like possibility. Thursday couldn't come fast enough, and when it did, I spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready. The coffee shop Marcus had chosen was in the village, the kind of place that served single origin beans and had actual books scattered around for people to read. It felt right for a first official date, casual enough to be comfortable, but thoughtful enough to show effort. I arrived 5 minutes early and found Marcus already there, reading something on his phone at a corner table. He looked up when I approached, and his face lit up with that same genuine smile I was beginning to recognize as specifically for me. "You found it okay?" he asked, standing to greet me. GPS is a wonderful thing. I hesitated for a moment, not sure whether to go for a handshake or a hug, and Marcus solved the problem by pulling me into a brief, warm embrace that felt natural and right. "What can I get you?" he asked. "I haven't ordered yet." "Whatever's good. I trust your judgment." He returned a few minutes later with 2 cappuccinos and what looked like an excellent chocolate croissant. "Thought we could share," he said, setting the pastry between us. "Unless you're one of those people who has strong feelings about food sharing." "I'm not, but it's good to know you're thinking about compatibility issues." "I'm thinking about a lot of things." Marcus said, and there was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. Such as? Such as how different you seem when you're not surrounded by wedding chaos, more relaxed, more yourself. Is that good or bad? Definitely good. I like the version of you I met this weekend, but this version is even better. I felt that familiar flush of warmth. You're pretty different too, less crisis management, more just present. I'm trying to be more present in general. Work keeps me moving so much that I sometimes forget to actually pay attention to where I am. And where are you now? Having coffee with someone I'm very interested in getting to know better. The directness of it should have made me nervous, but instead it was reassuring. No games, no ambiguity, just honest interest clearly stated. What do you want to know? I asked. Everything, but we can start small. Marcus leaned back in his chair, getting comfortable. Tell me about the photography. When did you know that's what you wanted to do? High school, actually. I was in this journalism class and we had to do a photo essay on something happening in our community. Most people did the obvious stuff, school sports, local businesses, whatever. But I ended up documenting this old theater that was being torn down. What made you choose that? It was this beautiful Art Deco building from the 1920s, and it had been showing movies for almost a century. But attendance was dropping, the owners couldn't afford renovations, and the city wanted to put in a parking lot. I broke off a piece of the croissant, remembering. I spent weeks there talking to the employees, photographing the details that would be lost. The hand-painted murals, the original light fixtures, the way the afternoon sun came through the lobby windows. Did the photos change anything? Not really. The theater still got torn down. But people saw them. They got published in the local paper, and suddenly everyone was talking about what we were losing. It made me realize that photography could make invisible things visible. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's what I like about your work. You don't just document things, you make arguments about what's worth paying attention to. Is that what I do? It's exactly what you do. Those urban decay photos weren't just about abandoned buildings. They were about what happens when we stop taking care of the places that used to matter. I'd never thought about my work that way, but he was right. What about you? When did you figure out the consulting thing? By accident, mostly. After college, I was working for this mid-sized company that was completely dysfunctional. Terrible communication, no clear processes, people working against each other instead of together. I kept making suggestions about how to fix things, and eventually my boss started asking me to work on bigger and bigger problems. And you were good at it. I was good at seeing the patterns. Most organizational problems aren't actually that complicated. They're just about people not understanding each other or working toward different goals. So you help them understand each other. I help them build systems that make understanding easier, clear processes, better communication structures, that kind of thing. It sounds like what you were doing this weekend, helping everyone work toward the same goal. Marcus smiled. Exactly like that, but usually with less alcohol and fewer emotional breakdowns. We talked for over 2 hours, the conversation flowing as easily as it had at the diner. Marcus told me about growing up in California, about coming out to his parents' senior year of college, about the challenges of building a career that required constant travel. I told him about my family, about the long process of accepting myself, about the loneliness of working as a freelancer. Do you miss it? I asked at one point. Having a home base, being part of a community? More than I probably should, Marcus admitted. The travel was exciting at first, but now it mostly feels like running away from something. What are you running away from? The risk of getting attached to places and people. He met my eyes, which is probably why this is scary for me. This? Sitting in a coffee shop with someone I'm already attached to, even though I've known you for less than a week. My heart did something complicated in my chest. You're attached to me? Completely, embarrassingly so. That's not embarrassing. No, it's honest. And I'm attached to you too. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand properly this time. Not just a brief touch, but a real connection. His hands were warm and calloused, and when he rubbed his thumb across my knuckles, I felt it everywhere. So what do we do about that? He asked. We figure it out as we go. I can work with that. When we finally left the coffee shop, it was nearly dark outside. We walked slowly toward the subway station, neither of us in a hurry to end the evening. This is going to sound presumptuous, Marcus said as we reached the entrance to the station. But would you like to have dinner sometime? An actual dinner? With courses and wine and time to really talk? That sounds perfect. When? This weekend? Saturday night? I'd love to. Marcus smiled, and then, after a moment's hesitation, he leaned in and kissed me. It was brief, soft, more of a question than a statement, but it sent heat through my entire body. Was that okay? He asked when we broke apart. More than okay. Good. I've been wanting to do that since the rehearsal dinner. Really? Really? You have no idea how hard it was to focus on wedding logistics when you were sitting right there looking like that. Looking like what? Like someone I wanted to know everything about. We kissed again, longer this time, and I could taste coffee and possibility on his lips. When we finally separated, I was breathing a little harder than normal. Saturday, I said. Saturday, Marcus agreed. I watched him disappear down the stairs to the southbound platform, then headed toward my own train with a stupid grin on my face. My phone buzzed before I'd even reached the turnstile. Thank you for tonight. Already looking forward to Saturday. I texted back. Me too, thanks for being worth getting nervous about. I like you're nervous. Don't change. The train was crowded, but I managed to find a seat by the window and spent the ride home thinking about Marcus's hands, his smile, the way he listened like every word mattered. When I got back to my apartment, I immediately started planning what to cook for him when he inevitably came over for dinner, what photos I wanted to show him, how to arrange my space so it felt welcoming rather than just functional. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of just moving away from things I didn't want. Saturday arrived with unusual October warmth. The kind of day that makes you want to walk everywhere instead of taking the subway. Marcus had made reservations at a small Italian place in the East Village, the kind of restaurant that had been there for 30 years and didn't feel the need to update its decor or its menu. I arrived first, which gave me a few minutes to settle my nerves and observe the other diners, couples sharing pasta, friends celebrating birthdays, families with children who were actually well behaved. It felt like the kind of place where you could have a real conversation without shouting over loud music or pretentious atmosphere. Marcus appeared right on time, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that somehow managed to look both casual and elegant. When he spotted me at our table, his face lit up with that same genuine happiness I was beginning to crave. "Sorry I'm late," he said. sliding into the seat across from me. You're not late. I was early. Nervous? A little. Good nervous, though. I'm glad there's such a thing as good nervous. The waiter appeared almost immediately, and Marcus ordered wine without checking with me first, which should have been presumptuous but somehow felt considerate, like he was taking care of the details so I could focus on the conversation. So, he said once we'd ordered food, how was your week? Any exciting client consultations? Actually, yes. Remember the corporate headshots I mentioned? Turns out the client is a nonprofit that works with LGBTQ plus youth, and they want me to do a whole campaign documenting their programs. Marcus's expression brightened. That's fantastic. How did that happen? The director saw some of my urban decay work online and thought I might be interested in something more community focused. We met yesterday and she basically described exactly the kind of project I have been wanting to do. The universe works in mysterious ways. What about you? How was your week of solving other people's problems? Interesting, actually. I'm working with this tech startup that's growing faster than they know how to handle. The founders are brilliant at product development, but they have no idea how to build functional teams. Sounds familiar. It's like wedding planning, but with venture capital instead of flowers. I laughed. And fewer emotional breakdowns? You'd be surprised. Tech bros can be just as dramatic as wedding parties. The food arrived: perfectly prepared pasta, simple salads, bread that was clearly made on site. We ate and talked about work, about travel, about the neighborhoods we'd lived in and the ones we wanted to explore. Marcus told me about a consulting project in Portland that had gone spectacularly wrong, and I told him about the time I'd accidentally photographed a drug deal while documenting an abandoned warehouse. Were you scared? He asked. Terrified, but I also got some incredible shots of the warehouse before I realized what was happening. Did you use them? Eventually, but I was more careful about scouting locations after that. Good policy. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing completely for what felt like the first time in weeks. Marcus was easy to talk to, easy to be around, and the attraction that had been simmering since the wedding weekend was building into something more substantial. Can I ask you something? I said as we shared dessert, tiramisu that was probably too rich, but absolutely worth it. Always. What do you actually want? Like, if you could design your ideal life, what would it look like? Marcus considered this seriously. I want to travel less and be home more. I want work that feels meaningful instead of just profitable. I want a relationship with someone who challenges me and supports me and makes me laugh. He paused. I want to wake up next to the same person more often than I wake up in hotel rooms. That sounds nice. What about you? I want to make work that matters. I want to be part of a community instead